Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because tomorrow, we have something even more incredible lined up for you. You won't want to miss it. These real-life moments of courage and justice are happening every day, and we're here to bring them to you. So, stick around, share your thoughts, and let's dive back into the action. The Royal Guard who defied orders to protect a veteran. The autumn air was crisp as Walt Calloway, a 91-year-old decorated war veteran, stepped out of the taxi in front of Buckingham Palace. The golden gates loomed before him, their intricate designs gleaming under the soft morning sun. Tourists gathered along the perimeter, cameras flashing as they captured the grandeur of the palace and the stoic royal guards standing at attention. Walt adjusted the blazer of his neatly pressed suit, the familiar weight of his military medals pinned across his chest. He had served in World War II, seen battles most people could never imagine, and lost friends whose memories he carried every day. Visiting Buckingham Palace was more than just a sightseeing trip, it was a moment of reflection, a quiet tribute to those who never made it home. As he moved toward the front of the crowd, people respectfully stepped aside, some noticing the medals on his chest. A few even offered him small nods, acknowledging the service he had given to his country. Walt gripped his cane a little tighter, grateful for the silent appreciation. But not everyone in the crowd shared that respect. Off to the side, a group of young men lingered, their voices too loud, their laughter sharp against the quiet admiration that surrounded Walt. Danny Carter, 24, and his two friends had been watching the scene unfold, but their eyes weren't on the palace, they were fixed on Walt. "Check out the old man," one of them snickered. "What's he trying to prove?" Danny tilted his head, smirking. "Bet those medals are just for show. Probably never saw a real fight." His friends laughed, emboldened by the arrogance that comes with youth. They watched as Walt continued his slow, deliberate walk toward the palace gates, his steps steady despite the years that weighed on his frame. Danny nudged his friend. "Let's go have a chat with Grandpa." With that, they moved toward Walt, weaving through the tourists until they reached his side. At first, they only stood near him, looming just close enough to make their presence known. Walt didn't acknowledge them, choosing instead to focus on the palace, on the unmoving figures of the royal guards, standing in disciplined silence. But Danny wasn't interested in letting him have his moment. "Nice medals, old man," he said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "Must have been real tough back in the day, huh?" Walt turned slowly, meeting Danny's gaze with the kind of calm that only comes from a lifetime of experience. "Son," he said, voice steady, "you don't know the half of it." But the young men weren't looking for a story. They were looking for trouble. Danny smirked, stepping in closer. "Oh yeah? You some kind of war hero?" His voice was laced with sarcasm, his friends chuckling behind him. Walt remained steady, gripping his cane just a little tighter, his eyes unwavering. "I did my part," he said simply. Danny scoffed. "Bet you just sat behind a desk, huh? Let the real soldiers do the work." One of the other guys, Mark, reached out and flicked one of Walt's medals, watching it sway slightly against his chest. "These even real?" he muttered. That was enough. Before Walt could react, a deep, commanding voice cut through the air. "Step away. Now." The tension in the air shifted instantly. The crowd, which had been casually watching the scene unfold, suddenly went silent. One of the royal guards, tall, imposing, dressed in full uniform, had broken his stillness. The man's voice was firm, but controlled. His name tag read Corporal Richard Harlow. The young men turned, startled. Danny recovered first, his bravado kicking back in. "Oh, we got a live one," he sneered, turning to his friends. "Didn't know you guys were allowed to talk." Corporal Harlow did not move, his stare locked on Danny. "You're harassing a veteran," he said, his voice flat, unwavering. "Step away." Danny's smirk faltered. He was looking directly into the eyes of a trained soldier, someone who had stood through worse than a couple of punk kids looking for trouble. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. "We were just talking," he said, raising his hands mockingly. "Didn't know the Queen's watchdogs were so sensitive." A few tourists murmured, their eyes darting between the confrontation and their phones. Some were already recording, sensing something unusual was unfolding. Walt sighed, shifting his weight slightly. "Son, you might want to listen to the man," he said, his tone laced with something dangerous: experience, wisdom, a warning. Danny rolled his eyes. "Or what?" The moment those words left his mouth, Corporal Harlow took a single step forward. The air crackled with tension. Royal guards never moved. Not unless something serious was happening. Danny's smirk disappeared completely. And suddenly, for the first time since he walked up to Walt, he wasn't so sure he was in control anymore. Danny took a half step back, his confidence shaken as Corporal Harlow's towering presence loomed over him. The guard's face remained expressionless, but the energy in the air had changed. The usual murmurs of tourists faded into an eerie hush. The silent, motionless guards of Buckingham Palace had been a spectacle for generations, a tradition of discipline and restraint. But now, one had moved. And every witness present knew something serious was about to unfold. Mark, trying to save face, scoffed. "Oh, come on, man. What's the big deal? We were just messing around." Harlow didn't flinch. "Step away. Last warning." Danny glanced at his friends, searching for backup. But even they weren't so sure anymore. The weight of the moment had hit them. This was no ordinary security guard, no rent-a-cop they could taunt for fun. This was a soldier, trained, disciplined, unwavering. But Danny wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. He straightened up, puffing out his chest. "And if I don't," he said, forcing a smirk. What happened next happened fast. Danny's hand shot out toward Walt's chest, aiming for the medals pinned proudly to his jacket. Whether he meant to tear one off or just make a scene, no one would ever know, because he never got the chance. Harlow moved. In one fluid motion, his gloved hand clamped around Danny's wrist before it could make contact. The force was controlled, measured, but it was enough to make Danny's entire arm lock in place. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. A royal guard had just made physical contact, something almost unheard of. Danny tried to yank his arm back, but it was like trying to move a steel beam. "I said, step away," Harlow repeated, his voice steady, but colder now. Danny winced, his bravado crumbling. His eyes darted toward his friends, but none of them moved to help. For the first time, reality was sinking in. This wasn't a game anymore. With a final, desperate tug, Danny finally managed to break free, stumbling backward. His face burned with humiliation, but he said nothing. Instead, he and his crew turned, slinking away into the crowd. No more sneers, no more taunts. Walt let out a slow breath, adjusting his jacket. He turned toward Harlow, his expression unreadable. "Didn't think I'd see the day one of you boys moved for someone like me." Harlow met his gaze. "Respect is earned, sir," he said simply. The tourists erupted into quiet applause. But even as the situation seemed to settle, a sense of unease lingered. Because something about the way Danny left, the way he glanced back, the way his jaw clenched with simmering anger, told Harlow this wasn't over yet. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the grand spires of Buckingham Palace, Harlow remained on high alert. The incident with Danny and his friends had ended, but something in his gut told him it wasn't over. The way Danny had glared back at him, the way his friends had whispered among themselves before disappearing into the crowd, it didn't sit right. Walt Turner, the veteran Harlow had stepped in to protect, stood nearby, adjusting his coat as if he was preparing to leave. The old man gave Harlow a nod, gratitude still evident in his eyes. "Son, I've seen a lot in my day," Walt said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I know when trouble's brewing. Those boys, they're not done." Harlow didn't respond right away. His training had taught him patience, discipline, and an unshakable exterior. But he wasn't just some ceremonial figure standing guard for tourists to gawk at. He was a soldier first. And right now, every instinct told him Walt was right. As the night deepened, the crowds thinned. The palace grounds, normally buzzing with tourists during the day, became eerily quiet. The shift change was still a few minutes away, and most of the security detail had moved to their designated posts. Harlow remained where he was, eyes scanning the shadows cast by the streetlights along the perimeter. Then, a flicker of movement. Near the far end of the gates, past the rows of neatly trimmed hedges, he caught a glimpse of figures moving against the darkness. At first, they blended into the night, staying low, their footsteps barely making a sound. But then, a hushed voice. A muffled chuckle. The faint gleam of a metallic object catching the light. Harlow's jaw clenched. Danny and his crew were back. This wasn't just some drunken tourist trying to climb the gates for a laugh. These guys had a purpose. And judging by their movements, they weren't here for another petty argument. He took a slow, measured breath, his fingers tightening against the grip of his ceremonial rifle. He knew the rules. Royal guards weren't supposed to engage unless there was an immediate threat. But this was something else. Then, in an instant, one of the figures broke into a sprint. Straight toward Walt. The old veteran barely had time to react as Danny lunged, reaching for his coat. Whether it was to steal the medals or something worse, Harlow didn't wait to find out. He moved. Breaking from his post, he closed the distance in seconds, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Step back. Now. The next few moments would change everything. Danny barely had time to process what was happening before Corporal Harlow was on him. The Royal Guard moved with precision, intercepting him just as he grabbed hold of Walt Turner's coat. Let go. Harlow's voice was low but commanding, the kind of tone that left no room for argument. Danny hesitated, startled by how fast the soldier had reacted. But the hesitation didn't last long. Fueled by arrogance and whatever reckless plan he and his friends had cooked up, he yanked harder on Walt's jacket, trying to tear it away along with the medals pinned to it. That was it. With a swift movement, Harlow stepped forward, knocking Danny's arm away with the butt of his rifle, not with full force, but just enough to send a clear message. Danny stumbled backward, eyes wide, caught completely off guard by the unexpected resistance. Stand down, now. Harlow's voice cut through the night like steel. For a moment, no one moved. The other two thugs, still lurking in the shadows, stiffened. They hadn't expected a Royal Guard to actually engage. Tourists gasped, a few backing away, some holding up their phones to record. A security officer from across the courtyard started running toward them, alerted by the sudden commotion. Danny's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his bravado cracking. He looked around, realizing that all eyes were on him now. The game was over. Then, with a snarl, he turned and bolted. His friends followed suit, disappearing into the night. Harlow exhaled sharply, his grip firm on his rifle as he watched them go. Every muscle in his body was still locked in defense mode, but the immediate danger had passed. He turned back to Walt, who was gripping his cane tightly, eyes still wide from the confrontation. Are you hurt, sir? Harlow asked, his voice softer now. Walt swallowed hard, then shook his head. No. Thanks to you. By now, the palace security had arrived, taking reports from the remaining witnesses. The captain of the guard approached, his expression unreadable. Inside. Now. Harlow knew what that meant. Breaking formation. Engaging physically. Speaking out of turn. He had broken the rules that had stood for centuries. And yet, as he gave one last glance at Walt, who still clutched his medals like they were his lifeline, Harlow knew he wouldn't change a thing. The real battle, however, was just beginning. What would you have done in this situation? Imagine witnessing a decorated veteran, a man who once fought for his country, being harassed in front of a place meant to symbolize honor and tradition. Would you have stepped in, or trusted that someone else would handle it? Corporal Harlow made a split-second decision, breaking a rule that had stood for centuries, but was it the right call? Should tradition always come before doing what's morally right? Or did he redefine what true service means? Let us know in the comments, what do you think of Harlow's decision? Should Royal Guards remain silent and still, no matter what happens around them, or should they be allowed to intervene when something truly crosses the line? And what about Danny and his gang? Do you think they'll come back for revenge, or have they learned their lesson? Share your thoughts below, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow, we're diving into another unbelievable story of discipline, honor, in the unexpected moments that test even the toughest soldiers. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss it.